Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of the Pig Edge, Teagasc Pig Podcast with me, Amy Quinn, where we are bringing you the latest news, information and advice to keep Irish pig farmers up to date. For this episode, I'm delighted to be joined by pig producer and tillage farmer Roy Gallie, a well-known figure in Irish pig farming. And in this episode, I talk to Roy about where he sees genetic improvement going, the biggest challenges facing the industry and his top pieces of advice. I first asked Roy to tell us a bit about his farming setup.
I have a small farm by, I suppose, pig standards now. I have 180 sows, but that is, that is well below the 750 average pig farmer. But it's integrated with cereal crops on the farm as well. So I grow all my own cereals and buy in as well. So that's 180 sows. We are a multiplier for a breeding company, Elite Sires. So all the females are selected for breeding and sell to other farmers. Although the demand for gilts is somewhat poor, if you like, because most people now have their gilts reared on farm. So I'm finding that the sale of gilts is probably not enough to pay for the trouble of having the whole herd with pure females, because I have all my females are pure, and so they're crossed with the landrace boar to give me an F1 cross. And then we dry all our own grain, and we put that in store, and that's what we're at the moment. And the mill and mix plant here, which goes back to a building that's over 200 years old. So the farm here was basically an ancient old estate, which was split up by the Land Commission in the 1930s. And my father bought a little central section of it, which was one of the bits for, I think it was £70 an acre at the time. And everyone said you were robbed. So I don't think that's quite the case, because we're still at it and enjoying it thoroughly. But unfortunately, now the next generation are not going to follow on after me. So that seems to be the same with a lot of farmers as well. So that's the sort of farming setup that I have at the moment.
And can you tell us a little bit about the history of the pig farm?
Well, that goes back a long way. I suppose my father I have to blame for the history. And he came from Scotland originally, and his great aunt had a farm down on the borders between Scotland and England. And they used to have show animals. So they had show pigs, but these were the sort of pigs that their udders would trail on the ground, and they had 10 inches of fat on them. But he always had a sort of an interest in farming. He was a flour miller by trade. Came across here to Ireland to install mill machinery into mills. Liked Ireland so much after the Second World War, because my poor family was decimated during the Second World War. And he decided to buy a farm. So he had some good friends in the rugby clubs above in Dublin, and who gave him a hand. And he always reckoned that the centre of an old estate was never built on bad land. And this one happened to come up for sale in the 1950s. And he was in a lucky position to be able to buy it. He had some money left to him by an aunt who had died in the UK. So that's where the farm starts. So the history of the farm here, then he would have, he had a bit of everything, like all farmers in the 1950s and 60s. There was a pig, and there was a cow, and there was a sheep, and there was a goat, and there was all the rest of it, chickens and hens and ducks. And he was always what they call lucky with pigs, as the expression used to go. And he got his first sow from a lady up in Ballivor by the name of Mrs. McGee. So the sow was called McGee. And she farrowed in a field just beside us here, what we call the island, which is a 3-acre field. And she went to the far corner of it. She made her nest in the far corner, and she had her piglets in it. And no one saw them for the first 3 weeks. And then she suddenly appeared with her entourage of piglets from the nest at some stage. She came for food, that was it, but the piglets stayed behind. So that was all au natural, long tails, all the rest of it. And of course, needless to say, over time, it's progressed from that. My father put in an 80 sow unit here. And when I came home, we trebled up to 180 sows. I was away at college for all my education, and then went to Saudi Arabia to do dairy farming out there, and came back then to farm in the 1970s. So we stuck, and I was very happy to stick with 180 sows. Didn't really have that sort of drive to go to a massive great big piggery. Quite happy to do a holistic farm that keeps me happy, gives me holidays, gives me a bit of time with family, because work-life balance is also quite important too. So I never really had that drive to go for a massive size. So very happy doing my 180 sows, and doing my own mill and mix, and keeping the finances tight.
And how would you say has the unit developed itself over time?
The first sows, of course, would have farrowed in the corner, and my father would have sat up on the deck chair for them to farrow. So when we put in the first farrowing house, and it's interesting because we're really turning full circle now. So we had a very specialized farrowing unit, which had 4 concrete crates, and the sow we had farrowed in those concrete crates, if you like. They were quite tight, but they were, piglets had a creep on both sides, and so she was restricted for the first 4 or 5 days after farrowing, and then she moved out into a loose pen, which was no slats, all fully concrete floor with a creep area at the back of it, all straw bedded. So the sow had what we're now looking at trying to plan for today. So we had that in the 1970s and 60s. Now it was an awful lot of work because every sow had to get cleaned out every day. So there was a wheelbarrow, and there was an hour job or a half an hour job to run down every pen, clean the sow out, and make sure the piglets were happy. And it was quite a labor intensive job when you've got straw and sows in the pen. So that's what we did those days. So then the weaners then would have gone on to a lot of solid floor and a little bit of slats, which are still working today. And then we moved on. When I came home, I put in a farrowing unit, another farrowing unit, all crates, modern style, weaner production for about 2 or 3 years, and then built a fattening unit on, and so went from there onwards. So needless to say, fattening is all slatted, fully slatted. At the time, in the 1980s, I put in a computer wet mix feeder as well. So we really modernized ourselves. I think I was one of the early guys with a computer wet mix feeder, which came in the early 80s and is still feeding pigs today. It's the original Funky. Now it's had a few revamps and it's had a few visits to the repair shop up in Dublin, but it's still feeding pigs nearly 40 years on. So I suppose one of the key things that the key drivers in the pig unit here was my relationship with my vet. And at that time it was Des Mills, and Des was part of the MOSFET a consortium in Naas, and Des was very much instrumental in moving me from a herd that had a lot of dysentery into a minimal disease herd. And I linked in with Blessington Farms up in Wicklow, who had these minimal disease pigs. They were PIC at the time, and I was able to get my first in-pig gilts served at a separate unit. So they arrived in here after we did a full clean out. So basically we started one end of the farm, cleaned the whole place down. Every slat was lifted, every slurry tank was washed out, right down to the very last ounce of muck at the bottom. Left for 6 weeks, and then we got our sows in. So I did a depop repop in the early 80s. And believe it or not, to this day, I am still free of pneumonia, because pneumonia was one of the things we want to get rid of. I've never seen dysentery, needless to say, ever since. But it's very nice because my farm is inside a lot of tillage ground, so I'm well isolated here, and isolation is the key, as we know with COVID. And so I'm free of pneumonias, which is great. Then once I moved to fattening, then I said, well, let's go for breeding stock as well. So rather than getting bigger, I decided that it'd be better to go for, well, as the old saying goes, an ounce of breeding is worth a ton of feeding. So I decided I'd be interested to go for genetics. So that's when we moved because PIC had a lot of political moves in it, and I was still linked into Blessington for a long time. And that was PIA at the time. So they disbanded and joined up with Top Pigs. Top Pigs disappeared off to the UK and left us high and dry here for a while. So I had no option but look elsewhere, and then that's why I linked up with Elite Sires. And to this day, then, so we're doing multiplying for Elite Sires with all the prolificacy that goes with the Danish pigs, because that really is revolutionary. To be able to produce 25 quite normal is the size of a litter now, as opposed to 10s and 12s. So that's really it's a lot of extra management, but it certainly has revolutionized piggery, that's for sure.
You mentioned you're a genetic multiplier. Where do you see pig genetic advancement going in the next 10 years?
That's a big question. I said it's an interesting question as well, because the power of genomics is just quite extraordinary. I think in numbers born, we've gone further than we need to go. Now, my sows, and there's no two ways about it, the pig on the sow on the tit is the best place to rear a pig. It's the cheapest, it's the most sustainable, everything else. Now, I know we can do lots with milk powder, and it does help a huge amount as well using milk powder. So I think we've probably gone as much as we can go with prolificacy. I say when you've got 14 teats on a sow, and if you increase it to 16 tits, well, it's still only 2 pigs, and you're still producing 25. So the genetic potential of the pig, now I suppose it's just going to keep on going. I would like to see the numbers come back somewhat, if that was possible, to pick a more even sized litter of, say, 15, 16, to between 15 and 20 would be a very nice litter to have, as opposed to 30. And I've had quite a few 30s, and you end up losing an awful lot of them because they're not fit to go, unfortunately. So I suppose the one I would like to see, certainly with the Danish ones, is their milking ability. And I think that's something that's missing in the Danish sow. Lots of, I suppose every different piece of genetics has different traits. But I think the genomic revolution is upon us, and we will be using it to use that genomics to increase traits that we wish to have in the pig herd. And that's going to be right across agriculture, which will help us. So that's where I see genetic moving. I think it's endless what we're going to be able to do with genomics.
As someone with a tillage and pig enterprise, do you think there's an opportunity for tillage and pig farmers to collaborate a bit more?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's I suppose the relationship that Willie Murphy has with George Walsh in Mullingar is a classic example, where the two of them are operating in whack together. And all the grain goes into the mill, and the mill feeds the pigs. So there's a relationship there. So I do actually think, yes, and I would like to have more interaction with the grain committee in IFA, and see if we can manage to do more farm direct to pig farm sales, so that we can, and our price is easy set nowadays. It's all on computer. And you can know where you are at any stage. You can either buy spot or you can forward buy. So there's lots of ways that pig farmers should be able to interact with grain farmers, providing, of course, that the grain that they're going to buy is of adequate quality, and that is really important. So that if there is a relationship going to be built up between pig farmer and cereal farmer, the quality of the grain is, of course, of paramount importance.
You're also the current chair of the IFA Pigs Committee. Can you tell me a little bit about this role and what it involves, really?
When you say yes to something, you never quite know what you're going to land yourself in, are you? I have to say my predecessor, Tom Hogan, was brilliant, and I certainly got a running committee which was tipping away, and had good relationships with everybody. That includes factories. So I suppose, as Pigs chairman, it's all been done through COVID, so you don't actually, it hasn't been a real chairmanship as yet, but where it hasn't, if you like. So I found personally that it's been a firefighting job, that I spend too much time doing what I have to do rather than what I would like to do. or what I want to do. So we've been dealing with things like environmental and the EPA. We've been dealing with the new TAMS regulations, which are trying to bring us to a stage where the welfare and removal of antibiotics from the piggeries, and of course the bugbear of intact tails has consumed a considerable amount of time. I think the penny has dropped eventually that this is something that is not possible in Irish farms, but it's taken an awful lot of persuasion for this to actually be realised that it is not possible yet, and we've got a long way to go before we start to rear pigs with intact tails. But this is the sort of stuff you're dealing with. So basically, it's government bodies issuing various different decrees, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that, and we're going to do something else. And then you have to firefight it to get some sanity into it. And that's what I found I've been doing most of my time spending doing that. So I've also got to communicate with my members, and I'm doing that through WhatsApp and through emails to the pig farmers. So we haven't had too many face-to-face meetings. I've had no face-to-face meeting. Everything's been on Zoom. So it's a little difficult when you don't actually get up in front and have a chat and be able to do that interaction after the meeting and roundabout and chat. It's all done on a Zoom, which is not so easy just to have the easy chat where you start to interact. But there's lots of things I would like to do. Yeah, lots of things I'd like to do. The DNA one is working away in the background. The DNA has been a fantastic asset, and that would be a predecessor of mine, Timmy Cullinan, now president of the IFA. It was his baby, and he set it up. So DNA is something that we need to do a bit more work with because it's real. So the food sector at the moment is, should we say, the catering trade is about 50% compliant, whereas the retail trade, that's all the Lidls and the Aldis and the Duns and the Tesco's, they're all nearly 98% compliant. So when they say it's Irish and their own stuff is all Irish, which is great, and it all carries the Bord Quality Assurance logo. But the food sector has a long way to go, and I've got some chains who have zero compliance, and you've got other chains who are 100% compliant. So there's work to do there. And maybe we could move into the government procurement division as well. So that's another area I'd like to do, but it's hard to get time to do everything. So I think that's an area, that's the prisons and the hospitals and the government and schools and all that sort of stuff that needs to be looked at, just to make sure they are using Irish, because I know if things are cheap in there and they tend to operate around whatever's cheapest, that's what we're going to buy. So it's an area that I just want to make sure that they are using Irish. But it's, again, it involves time and effort and meeting people.
What do you think the biggest future challenges are that are facing the industry?
It's certainly 3 or 4 major challenges. And maybe we'll deal with them one at a time. I think the biggest one is the threat of African swine fever, which is on the continent in Germany at the moment. It's just moved into a commercial herd in Germany. So this poses serious implications that it's moving out of the wild boars into forests. So if we, God forbid, were to have even a single case of African swine fever on this island, it would be curtains for the Irish pig industry, because our export markets would disappear overnight. And we are a major exporting nation for pig meat. We certainly can't consume everything we produce on the island. So this is down to biosecurity. Now, I'm a long proponent that we need in this country an all-island biosecure zone, and we need to be treated as an island. Unfortunately, as we all know, we have 2 parts of this island, and we've seen what's happened with Brexit, and that we can't get agreement on where the border should be for various things. So I'm afraid this aspiration of having an all-island biosecure zone is equally eluding. We can't seem to be able to get to that place yet, but we never lose up hope. So I suppose the security of it is down to all of us, and the pig farms themselves, thanks to the department as well, I have to give them credit where credit is due, have a sort of biosecurity audit going on at the moment, which we need to keep in touch with. So most pig farms are very well aware of the threat of African swine fever and have biosecurity. Certainly external biosecurity is very much to the fore on nearly every pig farm that I know about. But it doesn't necessarily need to be a pig farm where this African swine fever comes in. It would more than likely be a single pig somewhere or a couple of pigs somewhere else on one of the little hobby pigs, or God forbid, we have it out in the wild boar population that seems to be appearing in various locations around the country. So this we see as the number one major threat and major concern of Irish pig farmers to the movement of African swine fever, which can come in terribly easily on a piece of meat or a sandwich or some piece of meat somebody's brought in their luggage from one of the countries that has it. I know, for example, that I was out in Romania a couple of years ago on a hiking trip with a bunch of kids, and we were hiking all over the mountains there, and there was wild boar everywhere. They were all over the place. And so when I came back in, I did thoroughly disinfect my boots when I came back, but there was very little sign at the airport, and there was certainly nothing on the plane coming back from Romania to remind us that we were coming from an African swine fever zone and to report to the Department of Agriculture when we arrived. And this is the sort of biosecurity that we do need in this country. From those countries that are African swine fever positive, we need to have a constant reminder on those traveling into the country from these countries that there is a risk from them to our Ireland's biosecurity. So let's take that one to one side. The next one I see as a sort of as a major challenge is antimicrobials. So we've now got to move, and very rightly so, away from using antimicrobials on the farms because of the existence now of MRSA. As a little personal story, my poor father was involved in World War II, and in North Africa, where he happened to be in hospital with some shrapnel wounds, he saw with his own two eyes the miracle that was penicillin, curing men coming in from the front with injuries heretofore would have killed them, and they were suddenly recovering. And that was thanks to antibiotics and penicillin in particular. 2 generations on, and that's my father and me, and we are now at an age where we have diseases that we cannot cure, or we are on the last antibiotic that is available to cure diseases. So it is a very serious and a very serious threat to our longevity, if you like. So I thoroughly understand the whole drive behind reducing the amount of certainly critical antibiotics on farms, and that is most important that we do this. So I would encourage all farmers to fill out their antimicrobial use on the department website, because we can't actually, if you don't measure something, you can't be able to say how good we are and how well we've done. So we need to know how we are at the moment, and then we need to track using less of it. So that's all happening. I think a lot of that's coming in at the end of January next year, and that will be an interesting move forward. We do, of course, have to take the welfare of our pigs into account, and it's terribly important that we do have some antimicrobials on farm so that we can use these to look after sick animals as they get sick. But that will be on an individual basis rather than through the feed or through the water, which is, that will be necessary maybe for certain pens of pigs, but that will all be under the vet's advice to the farmers. So that's number 2. The next one, we've got to have pigs with minimal emissions, and there's another challenge, because I don't know too many pigs that don't smell. But we've now got cases where smells emanating from piggeries are resulting in court cases and requests to go for mediation to try and reduce the amount of smells coming out of piggeries just because of the location. I happened to be on one the other day beside the Bog of Allen, I couldn't get a better place to build a piggery because there was, I don't know how many thousands of acres to the windward side of it. So there was nobody going to be complaining about that piggery. Unfortunately, they're not all like that. And some are near and close to people where people live, or people have moved out and they don't like the smell. And they're now issuing complaints to county councils. So this is another one, both that's for smells, but then of course we've got ammonia emissions as well. So we've got to reduce that for climate change because we are a greenhouse gas producer in ammonia, and that has to be done too. So housing is going to change, slurry storage is going to change. These are challenges. We're now in an era where the dynamics of the pig industry are being driven by NGOs in Europe and lobbies within countries, which are set on improving the welfare, which is absolutely of paramount importance. I'm very much behind the welfare, if you like, improvement. But there is a considerable cost involved with basically revamping the internal structures that are present on every farm in Ireland. And what I've seen of the sort of design of pens and piggeries that is they're looking to become the norm on pig farms, there needs now to be a link up between the consumer and the pig farm and some sort of stream of finances. Because as I said yesterday to one person, that says, we would do anything we possibly can as long as we're able to do it economically. If it's not an economic feasibility, and some of the building, we're talking of millions here now that needs to be invested, that they want invested in piggeries. And at current prices that we're on at the moment, and with grain going up, so to speak, pig price coming down. In 1986, I was paid 50 pence a pound for my pigs. If you relate that to today's money, from 50 pence a pound to euros per kilo, it works out at 140 cent a kilo. Belgium this week is on 120 cent a kilo. We're on 160 cent a kilo. So there's not too much between the two of us. And if we were to even it out, we're heading in that direction to being on exactly the same price as I got in the mid 1980s. And I don't need to tell everybody where the other costs have gone right throughout it. So we've been running faster and faster and faster and faster to stand exactly still. They're big challenges, and they're big challenges that cost a lot of money. So the final hurdle that we have is actually being able to recoup some of these costs that are going to be necessary on farms from the marketplace. And how we do this, I have yet to solve, because at the moment we are paid on a supply and demand situation. And unfortunately, at the side of it, we have, while supply and demand works great for the majority of times, when there are side issues that are being thrown at the primary producer, which is us, we have no recourse to go to the marketplace to say, we have to comply with this, it's costing this, and therefore we're going to have to put up our price of our pigs. That is just not the way it works at the moment. So I see this as the biggest challenge, at the end of it, is how we can manage to recoup, or how the farmer is going to be reimbursed for measures that he is being asked to take to make sure that our pigs are reared with the utmost welfare in mind, using the least amount of antibiotics and with the least amount of ammonia emissions coming from the pig units. And that, I think, is our biggest challenge.
And so what was the best piece of business advice you've been given along the way that's really stuck with you?
Yeah, that's another, it's an interesting one, because there's two lessons I've been learned. I was learned earlier on, and it was both of them happened to be on a pig course, or not a pig course, a postgrad course in England at the Y College of Agriculture, where they drew together a 3-week residential course and put a bundle of people. There was a couple of bankers, there was a couple of estate agents, there were some very large UK farmers. There was Paddy Ree, that's me, from Ireland. There was a Dutch and a Dane and a French. A very interesting group of people. And we've actually stayed in touch ever since. And we meet up once every 2 years to go and visit farms. Those of us that are left alive, but unfortunately some have died since then. But anyhow, on the course, there was this old professor stood up and he looked at us and he says, it was all to do with employment. And he says, the fella I'm going to employ, he says, will have done psychology, sociology and politics. And I looked at the fellow beside me and I said, good grief, how are we meant to farm with a psychologist or a sociologist or a politician? This fellow's off the wall. But he went on to explain that anybody can be a farmer. But what they can't do is, or what we're not very good at, is managing people. And if you have got somebody who's done a bit of psychology, he'll understand how the human works. If he's got sociology, he will understand how people work together. And if he's a politician, a bit of politics in him, he'll be able to manipulate them to get them to do what he wants them to do. But the moral of the story was all around people management and people skills and looking to get the best out of people and how you encourage people. And I thought that was a huge lesson to learn, because all of us and everything we do revolves around people. And if we're good with people, we'll get the best out of them and our business will thrive. So that was the first piece of good advice. And the second one then was a thing we did. We did class one evening and we had to battle against the computer. Now, this was the early days of computers. And we had to do a farm plan. And the farm plan, our little group was working away. We discovered that every time we looked for advice, they used to double our profits. Now, we weren't too sure if we were really on the right nuts or not, but we kept on looking for advice and they kept on doubling our profits. So we thought, right, lads, we're on a winner here. And we won the competition. And the object of this lesson was that you should always get as much advice as you possibly can for any project or whatever you're going to do. You don't need to take it all. You don't need to apply it or any of that, but just get it. And if you can get the advice and the help of other people and other bits of expertise when you make decisions, you'll never go too far wrong. Because everyone blames everybody else when things go wrong, but actually the blame must rest with you because you took the decision. But the important thing is if you can get a decision that's based on good advice, then that is worth $1 million.
And so is there any other advice that you would give to any pig producer out there right now?
Pig meat is a staple part of the global diet. So pig meat will and must always be profitable in one shape, form or another. So I would encourage anybody to stick at it, because if you do the job well and are prudent with your financial management and attention to detail with your pigs and your staff, you should be able to run and always be able to run a piggery that will leave you some profit at the end of the day. But the margins are very tight, that's for sure. But there are opportunities, I think, for if you do the job really well, and everybody who's got passion in the job will always make a good farmer, is the way I look at it. So it's really down to your own passion. And if you've got that passion and drive, there will be profits left for pig farmers forever, because we can't do without pigs to feed our population unless they all go vegan or vegetarian, which I don't think is going to happen.
Thanks very much, Roy, for joining us. That was really interesting.
That's my pleasure, Amy. It's always good just to be able to relate one's own little piece of history on this planet, and everybody has their own little piece of history. So it's my pleasure to share it with you. And long may the pig industry be profitable in times to come.
That's it for this episode of The Pig Edge, and many thanks to Roy for joining me on the show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more farming information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Amy Quinn. Thanks for listening.